Commander Tillen stood in the observation room, a place built specifically for alien dignitaries visiting the human military headquarters. The walls were lined with advanced consoles, many displaying live feeds of Earth's spacefaring missions, but none of them captured his attention. His eyes were fixed on the center of the room, where a human officer stood waiting. The officer was a senior member of Earth's military, decorated and battle-hardened. He spoke with a kind of unshakable confidence that came from decades of experience, but today his words seemed almost deferential, eager. He gestured toward the central terminal where a young girl sat, her small hands gripping the controls of a large, sophisticated simulator. "This is Alina," the officer said with a slight smile. "One of our most gifted prodigies. She's been playing in this simulator since she was 6, and she has yet to lose a simulation. I thought you might find her interesting." Tlan's antennae flicked with interest. For a moment, the Admiral thought of declining the invitation. After all, what could a child's game possibly teach him about a species like humanity? He had seen human military strategy, read their records, and observed their fledgling space missions from a distance. They were still in their infancy compared to the commanding species of the galaxy, his species. But something about the officer's enthusiasm piqued his curiosity. This was not a request for a typical diplomatic exchange, nor was it an offer of information he could study at his leisure. It was an invitation to witness something peculiar, something unique to humanity, and Tlan, with all his experience, had learned not to dismiss the unknown too quickly. "Very well," he said, his voice rich with a controlled, calm authority that reflected the years of leadership he carried. "I will observe." The officer nodded, stepping back as Tlan approached the console, his eyes narrowing slightly as he regarded the young girl. Alina was no more than 10 years old, with short brown hair that bounced as she shifted in her seat. She wore a headset that covered most of her face, her eyes locked onto the holoprojector before her. The simulator, a vast virtual reality chamber, was designed to replicate complex Starship operations, maneuvering through asteroid fields, engaging in fleet battles, and simulating high-stakes diplomacy. As the simulation began, Tlan observed the first moments closely. At first, the girl seemed entirely focused, her small fingers moving with deliberate precision across the console. Her ship, a sleek, advanced human vessel, soared through the simulated cosmos, dodging asteroids and navigating a chaotic field with unnerving calm. The Admiral's sharp eyes scanned the tactical displays. Every movement the ship made, every change in course was deliberate. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. The simulation, designed to be challenging for even the most experienced humans, presented a formidable threat. A rival fleet of alien ships was on a direct course for Alina's vessel, and they were heavily armed. The Admiral watched as Alina's ship was boxed in, the enemy's firepower overwhelming. Most children would have panicked by now, he thought. They would have floundered under pressure, tried to flee or surrendered. But Alina? She didn't flinch. Her fingers danced across the controls with a swiftness that made Tlan's keen eyes blink in surprise. In the span of a few moments, she adjusted her ship shields, redirected power to engines, and moved with an elegance that made no sense given the gravity of the situation. Her ship dodged incoming fire with precise, almost instinctive movements. She wasn't just reacting. She was predicting what the enemy would do next. Tlan's antennae twitched in intrigue. How could a child possess such instinct? How could she remain so calm, so composed? It was as though she understood this simulation on a level beyond what the program was designed to teach. As the holographic stars flickered around her, the Admiral realized something unsettling. This wasn't just a game. It was a challenge, one that this child was already overcoming. As Alina's starship glided effortlessly through the simulated asteroid field, Tlan remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the child. The hum of the simulation's engines filled the room, but to the Admiral, it seemed distant, like a soft backdrop to something far more captivating. Alina's small hands flew over the controls, making adjustments with a speed and precision that seemed almost unnatural. It was clear that this was no ordinary child. Her focus, the way her brow furrowed slightly in concentration, suggested a depth of understanding that far exceeded her age. Talan leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes narrowing as the next phase of the simulation began. The asteroid field was cleared, and now the real challenge began. An enemy fleet, far larger and more heavily armed, materialized on the holographic screens. There were at least 12 ships, all heavily fortified, each one possessing firepower that could obliterate a fleet of lesser species. For most participants, this would be a nightmare scenario. It was designed to test the most skilled pilots, a test of decision-making under pressure, resource management, and quick reflexes. But Alina didn't appear shaken. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady, and calmly surveyed the enemy formation. Her ship was outnumbered, its weapons just a fraction of the firepower that the enemy fleet could unleash. Talan couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. How could a child be so composed in the face of such overwhelming odds? Without hesitating, Alina issued a series of commands. Her ship, sleek and agile, darted forward, evading incoming fire with surgical precision. But instead of simply fleeing or trying to outmaneuver the enemies, she was taking them on head-to-head, as if she had already mapped out the entire battlefield in her mind. She wasn't just reacting to the enemy's movements. She was anticipating them, as if she knew what they would do before they did it. Talan's first instinct was to chalk it up to luck, to the way the simulation might have been designed to favor the player. But there was something about the way Alina acted, how she calculated every turn, every shift in power distribution, how she adjusted her shield strength at exactly the right moment, that told him this was no ordinary game mechanic. It was strategy, pure and simple, and not the kind of strategy you'd expect from a child. A shift in her approach made Talan sit up straighter. Alina had decided to engage the largest of the enemy vessels, the one with the heaviest firepower. Instead of retreating or attempting a simple defensive maneuver, she made a bold move. She charged head-on, activating her ship's cloaking device just before she entered firing range. For a brief moment, it seemed as though her ship had vanished into thin air. The enemy ship scrambled, unable to track her. In that instant, Alina reappeared behind the largest enemy ship, launching a series of calculated attacks. The ship's weak points exploded in quick succession as the small child's commands executed flawlessly. Alina didn't even look up as her ship's cannons fired, the same focused expression never leaving her face. The enemy vessel took heavy damage, and then another, smaller ship fell to the same strategy. Talan blinked, unable to contain his growing amazement. The enemy fleet, once so overwhelming in its might, was beginning to falter. The Admiral had seen fleets crumble under far less, and yet this child, this young human, was dismantling the simulation's toughest opponents with a grace and brilliance that belied her years. He couldn't fathom it. The technology to create such a sophisticated simulation existed across many species, but no other race had produced a child like this. No other race had displayed this level of innate tactical genius in such a young mind. As the last enemy ship in the fleet crumpled under her relentless assault, Alina's ship sailed triumphantly through the wreckage. She had won, and it was clear to Talan that for her, this was no longer just a game. It was a reflection of something deeper, something extraordinary within the human species. He stood silently for a moment, his antennae twitching with a mixture of awe and unease. How far could this child's talent extend? And more importantly, what did it mean for the future of humanity? Talan remained still, his focus unwavering as Alina's ship coasted through the quiet aftermath of her victory. The simulation had ended, the enemy fleet obliterated, but the Admiral's mind raced. The human child had demonstrated not just skill, but a depth of insight into tactics and strategy that was unsettling. Talan had seen many brilliant minds across the galaxy, leaders who had mastered the art of war, but none of them had been so intuitive. Alina casually adjusted the headset that she wore, her eyes scanning the next set of mission parameters with the kind of calm that would have been impossible for most adults. Yet the Admiral couldn't help but notice something strange. A slight shift in her demeanor, the way she analyzed the new mission's details with a growing intensity. Her hands were no longer darting across the console with the same confident speed. She was slowing down, becoming more deliberate. It was as if she was calculating something on a deeper level. Talan's gaze sharpened. Something was different. As the next scenario loaded, the simulation shifted again. This time, the stakes were raised. Alina's ship appeared in the midst of an ambush. A powerful alien fleet, far larger and more formidable than the previous one, loomed on the horizon. The enemy ships were already in position, their weapons powered up and ready to fire. The simulation had gone from challenging to downright dangerous. But instead of panic or hesitation, Alina's response was eerily calm. She immediately took control, but there was something more careful, more calculating about her movements. Her ship shifted into high gear, executing evasive maneuvers with precision that Talan had seen only in seasoned commanders. However, unlike the previous battle, where Alina had taken bold risks and aggressive strategies, this time she was waiting, observing. The enemy fleet began to advance, and for a brief moment, the Admiral thought the girl had made a mistake. She was allowing the enemy to close in, drawing them in, even though her ship was clearly outgunned. But then, something clicked. Alina's ship darted to the side, narrowly avoiding a barrage of enemy fire. Talan's eyes widened. She wasn't just dodging. She was luring the enemy into a trap. With a swipe of her hand, Alina adjusted the ship's shield settings, optimizing them to absorb the incoming fire while simultaneously redirecting power to the engines. The enemy ships, expecting a straightforward confrontation, were completely thrown off balance. Alina's ship danced through the chaos, effortlessly outmaneuvering the larger fleet, all the while drawing them further into a narrow formation. Then, as the trap was set, she struck. Alina's ship suddenly turned on a dime, executing a full-throttle burst toward the center of the enemy formation. Talan's eyes tracked the movement as her ship surged forward with terrifying speed. The enemy ships tried to retaliate, but Alina was already several steps ahead. In a calculated sequence of rapid fire and tactical adjustments, she tore through the weakest ships in the formation, exploiting the smallest gaps in their defenses with chilling accuracy. It was a textbook example of battlefield control, except it wasn't a textbook. It was a child playing a game. And yet, this was no mere game to her. Talan had spent decades studying the most skilled military minds in the galaxy, from the fierce tacticians of the Zarar Empire to the cunning fleet leaders of the Andromeda Dominion. And yet, this human child, this young girl, was showing him something entirely different. She was thinking outside of the established doctrines, bending them to her will with a creativity and brilliance that defied the conventions of war. As the enemy fleet crumbled under the assault, Alina's calm demeanor never wavered. She didn't celebrate or gloat. She simply adjusted the power to her shields and continued to monitor her next move, ready for whatever challenge came next. Talan's antennae twitched in confusion, as if trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. The child had just obliterated an enemy force 10 times her size, outsmarting the simulation's most advanced algorithms. This was no longer a demonstration of human potential. It was a warning of what was to come if humanity's warfighters developed such minds at a young age. Talan, once confident that his species held all the answers, was beginning to wonder if his calculations had been wrong. This wasn't a simple game for the human child. It was a glimpse into the future, a future where humans might not just challenge the galaxy, but conquer it. The simulation had shifted again, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever. Talan's eyes, always sharp, never left the screen as Alina's starship faced its most formidable challenge yet. This mission was no longer just about surviving. This was a battle for supremacy, one where the smallest mistake would cost the child everything. But Alina's composure never wavered. The simulation began with a massive, near-impossible task. Alina's ship was outnumbered and outgunned by an overwhelming alien fleet, a force that appeared to be fully coordinated and prepared to overwhelm her at every turn. The enemy ships, a new class designed for maximum efficiency in space combat, formed a solid wall of destruction that no human pilot had ever survived, let alone triumphed over. They were massive warships with highly advanced weapons, equipped with targeting systems so precise, it was said no ship could avoid their fire for long. Tilan watched, unable to predict how Alina would handle the situation. She had already surpassed every expectation he had, but now, she was entering uncharted territory. He knew how quickly an experienced commander could falter in such a situation. Even the most seasoned fleet admirals could buckle under the pressure when facing such overwhelming odds. Yet, Alina did not hesitate. Her fingers moved with purpose, inputting commands with a fluidity that seemed to defy the complexity of the simulation. She moved her ship closer to the advancing enemy, not away from it, engaging her enemies head-on in a way that felt almost reckless. The Admiral's gaze narrowed. This was no longer about tactical precision. Alina was playing a game of risk, and it was a dangerous one. As the enemy opened fire, Alina responded in an instant. She had rerouted power from the ship's auxiliary systems into the primary shield grid, forcing them to absorb the enemy's energy blasts. The energy shields flickered under the intense barrage, the ship groaning with the strain of the hits, but they held. For now. Then, something remarkable happened. Instead of continuing her evasive tactics, Alina took a direct course toward the center of the enemy fleet, weaving through their fire with incredible skill, almost as though she were daring them to hit her. Tilan could see the reasoning behind the move. She wasn't just avoiding enemy fire. She was creating openings, taking calculated risks to force the enemy to spread their fire. It was a move so audacious that Tilan's antennae twitched involuntarily in alarm. Was she going to deliberately sacrifice her ship? In that critical moment, Alina gave the order. The Starship deployed its advanced cloaking system, vanishing from the enemy's sensors just as they had anticipated her move. The alien fleet, expecting her ship to take a different course, was thrown into confusion. The carefully coordinated targeting systems began to malfunction as their scans were disrupted. And in that fleeting moment of chaos, Alina struck. Her ship reappeared behind the largest alien warship, the one at the heart of the formation. The heavy firepower of the fleet's flagship loomed large and menacing, but Alina was already calculating her next move. Tilan felt a spark of recognition deep in his core. This was the brilliance of a mind who thought beyond strategy, beyond conventional tactics. Alina didn't just rely on technology or the strength of her weapons. She used the chaos of the battlefield to her advantage, exploiting every weakness in the enemy's formation. Alina launched a series of precisely timed torpedo barrages. The first few missed, but the next salvo was deadly accurate, hitting the flagship's engines. The warship floundered, its momentum thrown off as it lost power. Alina's ship darted through the opening, targeting the smaller vessels, now scrambling to respond. One by one, they fell, each ship's defenses unable to cope with Alina's unpredictable, devastating strikes. The enemy fleet, which had seemed invincible just moments before, began to break apart. In a flurry of explosions, the once imposing force was scattered, defeated by the very child who had no reason to understand the sheer magnitude of what she had just done. Tilan's mind was racing now, unable to comprehend the scale of the victory he had just witnessed. The simulation had gone from being a demonstration of human skill to an extraordinary feat of ingenuity and audacity. Alina's ship glided through the wreckage, unscathed. Her calm demeanor remained unchanged as she surveyed the battlefield, a testament to her steady mind. She had won, but not in a way anyone, human or alien, could have predicted. Tilan exhaled, feeling a cold chill wash over him. The implications of what he had just witnessed were far-reaching. This wasn't just the triumph of a brilliant child over a computer-generated fleet. This was the potential of humanity laid bare, a species capable of turning the tide in the most dangerous of circumstances with nothing but quick thinking and unmatched creativity. The child had played with fire and come out unscathed. And in that moment, Talan realized something terrifying. Humanity wasn't just a species to be underestimated. They were a force to be reckoned with. Talan's eyes remained fixed on Alina's face as the simulation came to an end. The last of the alien warships had disintegrated into space debris, a testament to the young human's remarkable skill and audacity. Yet, despite the victory, the Admiral felt no sense of triumph. There was only a lingering, uncomfortable awareness, a knowledge that this child had just redefined everything he thought he knew about warfare, about strategy, and about humanity itself. Alina unstrapped herself from the simulator seat and removed her headset, her face unreadable. She didn't seem tired, nor did she revel in her success. To Talan, it was as if the outcome was merely an expected result, an inevitable conclusion to a game she had already mastered. But he had seen it all: the rapid decisions, the calculated risks, the unfathomable precision. This was no ordinary prodigy. Alina was something else entirely. The human officer who had introduced Alina turned to Talan with a knowing smile. "Impressive, isn't it?" Talan didn't respond immediately. He had too much on his mind, his thoughts racing. The simulation had been designed for far more experienced commanders. Advanced tactics, intricate strategies, complex battlefield dynamics. Yet here was a child, barely into her teenage years, dismantling it all with a casual ease that made his antennas twitch in both confusion and awe. "Is she always this calm?" Talan asked, his voice carefully controlled, masking the uncertainty he was beginning to feel. The officer nodded, his smile widening. "We've never seen anything like it. Alina's been in the simulators for years now, but each time she manages to surprise us with her creativity, her unorthodox methods. It's as if she can see the battle play out before it even happens." Talan glanced back at Alina, who had begun to chat casually with some of the technicians in the room, discussing the technical aspects of the simulation, as if it were nothing more than a routine task. It was unsettling how she carried herself, like someone who had already seen the horrors of war and understood them on an intimate level. Yet there was no arrogance in her demeanor, no ego, just an almost unnerving certainty in her abilities. "She seems different," Talan remarked, his tone more thoughtful now. "Does she understand the gravity of what she's doing?" The officer's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more contemplative expression. "I think she does, but not in the way you might expect. She doesn't see war as a game or as something to fear. To Alina, it's more about understanding the nature of conflict, finding solutions before the violence even begins." Talan's antennae twitched again. The officer was right. Alina's brilliance was not in her raw power, but in her ability to anticipate, to outthink her opponents before the first shot was ever fired. That kind of foresight was rare, even among the most seasoned leaders. But it was also dangerous. The Admiral found himself remembering his own species' history. The Gerard had once been a young, ambitious race, eager to claim their place in the galaxy. But they had learned too late that power, when wielded without wisdom, led to destruction. He couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if humans, led by prodigies like Alina, reached the heights of technological and military prowess before they fully understood the consequences? The potential for both greatness and calamity was immense. "Do you believe she will be ready?" Talan asked, his voice quieter now, tinged with concern. "Ready for what humanity will face in the coming decades, the challenges they will undoubtedly encounter." The officer paused for a moment, his eyes softening as he looked at Alina. "She's already prepared. I think she's always been ready." Talan didn't know how to respond. Part of him still wanted to dismiss Alina as a child, a fluke in the grand design of things. But another part, a growing and unsettling part, realized he was witnessing the dawn of something far more significant. Alina was not just a prodigy. She represented humanity's potential for evolution, for advancement, and perhaps for dominance. Talan watched as Elena laughed with the technicians, her face lit up with a smile so innocent that it was hard to believe she had just orchestrated the destruction of an entire alien fleet. It was that juxtaposition, the innocence of a child with the mind of a seasoned strategist, that was beginning to disturb him. This was no longer just a game for Elena. No, this was something far more dangerous. And as Talan stood there in the silent observation room, a cold realization began to settle deep within him. Humanity was not only capable of reaching the stars, they were already on the brink of mastering them. And once they did, nothing in the galaxy would be the same. The days following Elena's last simulation victory were eerily quiet. Talan could not shake the feeling that something had shifted, both within the human child and within himself. What had once seemed like an isolated, impressive display of skill now seemed like a glimpse into something much more complex, something that, if left unchecked, could change the entire balance of power in the galaxy. He found himself in a private briefing room, the walls of the chamber lit with a soft, blue glow. The human officer who had introduced him to Elena, Lieutenant Commander Darren, had requested a meeting. Talan had agreed, eager to understand the context surrounding Elena's abilities and the potential threat she, and by extension, humanity, represented. As the doors slid open, Darren stood, waiting with a clipboard in hand. His usual confident demeanor was tempered with a slight wariness, the weight of the previous day's events clearly hanging over him. "Admiral, I'm glad you came," Darren said, ushering Talan into the room. Talan gave a nod in acknowledgement but remained silent as he took his seat. He couldn't quite place what unsettled him more: the skill of the child or the calm indifference with which humanity seemed to accept such extraordinary talent. To them, Elena was a prodigy, nothing more. But to Talan, she was a harbinger of a future none of them could yet understand. "I'm sure you have many questions," Darren began, his tone a mixture of caution and professionalism. "Yes," Talan replied, his voice steady. "The girl, Elena, she is more than just a product of advanced training. She feels different, more instinctual than most commanders I've encountered, regardless of their species. I can't help but wonder, where does that kind of skill come from?" Darren leaned against the table, exhaling deeply. "I can tell you she wasn't trained in the way most people think. The simulation you saw, the one where she defeated the alien fleet, was only the beginning of her capabilities. Elena has been learning, yes, but she's always had this instinct. It's as if her mind works differently, as though she can predict what others will do before they do it." Talan narrowed his eyes, intrigued. "And how do you explain that? This instinct you speak of, how can a human child have such a rare quality?" "That's the thing," Darren said, his voice quieter now. "We don't really know. We've looked into her background, but her aptitude isn't just academic. It's almost as if she's attuned to the universe itself, seeing patterns, connections others can't. It's something beyond training, beyond anything we've seen." Talan sat back, trying to digest what Darren had said. It wasn't uncommon for a species to produce a rare, brilliant individual, but this went beyond brilliance. This was something elemental, something that had the potential to reshape not only humanity's military future, but the galaxy's future as a whole. "Have you studied this phenomenon? Is it unique to her?" Talan pressed, his curiosity piqued. "Do you have any insight into how this might impact the larger human population?" Darren shook his head. "No one else exhibits her level of ability. But we suspect there's something happening here, something beyond what we understand about human potential. Elena's abilities might be tied to something more fundamental, even genetic. She wasn't just born with this capability. It's been nurtured, even before she came to us. We've seen it in her family history." Talan raised an eyebrow. "A family history of such aptitude?" "Yes," Darren confirmed. "Her mother was a brilliant engineer, and her father was a tactical officer in the Earth Defense Fleet. But even beyond that, there are stories in her family going back generations, of humans who displayed exceptional skill in battle, in science, in strategy. We're still piecing together the details, but it's clear Alina is the culmination of something much larger. The implications were staggering. A single human child, born into a lineage of such untapped potential, could change the very fabric of human society. But it wasn't just her lineage that concerned Tilan. It was the way Alina seemed to effortlessly adapt to any environment, to outthink opponents with such ease. There was no sign of hesitation, no sense of doubt in her actions, only an intuitive grasp of the present, as though she were already in command of a future that had yet to unfold. Tilan's mind raced as he processed the information. You said she could change humanity's trajectory. What does that mean for the rest of the galaxy? Darren's eyes flickered with a hint of uncertainty. We don't know yet, but it's possible that, if others like her emerge, humanity will become more than just a participant in galactic politics. They could become the driving force, and that's something we all need to consider. Tilan felt the weight of those words settle over him. The quiet power of humanity, embodied in the child Alina, could indeed be the catalyst for something far greater, or far more dangerous, than any of them had anticipated. As the meeting drew to a close, Tilan's mind remained heavy with the knowledge that the balance of power in the galaxy had just begun to shift, and the human species might be the ones steering the wheel. In the days that followed, Tilan found himself unable to shake the feeling that humanity's future had just begun to unfold in a way that no one, not even the humans themselves, could have anticipated. The implications of Alina's abilities were vast, and Tilan had seen enough to know that it wasn't just the child herself that posed a threat. It was the potential for others like her, others who could think in ways that made traditional strategies and alliances obsolete. There was no denying it. The galaxy was on the brink of something new, and humanity was at the center of it. The Gerard Admiral couldn't ignore the stirrings of unease in his chest as he watched humans, from their military leaders to their civilians, go about their daily routines. To them, Alina's gifts might have seemed like a stroke of luck, a quirk of nature that couldn't be replicated. But Tilan knew better. His species had learned the hard way that a single individual could alter the course of an entire war, and if humanity's exceptional minds were allowed to proliferate, the consequences could be catastrophic. The news of Alina's victory, although classified, had spread like wildfire among military circles. Within days, the highest echelons of power in the galaxy were aware of her accomplishments. Other species, some allies, some rivals, were already beginning to take notice. Tilan had heard whispers of a new kind of diplomacy emerging, one where humanity was suddenly a key player. The ramifications were impossible to ignore. It wasn't just her victory in the simulation that had sparked concern. It was how she had done it. Alina had demonstrated something far more than tactical brilliance. She had shown an ability to read the flow of battle with an almost supernatural intuition. She had bent the very nature of the conflict to her will, creating opportunities where none should have existed, exploiting weaknesses in ways that defied logic. And now, the question on every admiral's mind was this: what if this was only the beginning? What if Alina's gifts were only the first ripples in a much larger wave of human potential? If her kind were to spread, if the human race were to find and nurture individuals like her, the galaxy might be in for a storm. Tilan spent long hours in his private quarters, poring over his species records, studying history, military tactics, and everything that might give him insight into what was unfolding. The galaxy had always been a place of competition, where power was seized through force and diplomacy. But Alina's mind, her creativity, and the way she reshaped conflict itself, was unlike anything he had seen before. In the quiet moments of reflection, Tilan couldn't help but wonder if this was the dawn of a new era, one where humans, given the right guidance and understanding, could become the architects of their own destiny. It was a thought that both thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. At the same time, Elena remained unaware of the storm brewing around her. To her, the battles were games, challenges to be conquered, yes, but not the existential question for entire civilizations that they had become to others. She trained diligently, improved her skills, and prepared for whatever came next, all the while maintaining the same calm, unaffected demeanor that had both bewildered and impressed those around her. But what if Elena, what if humanity was not just preparing for the challenges of the present, but for a war yet to come? A war that could alter the balance of the galaxy forever. As Tilan watched her from the distance, her face now both a symbol of hope and fear for the galaxy, he couldn't help but realize that the true battle was no longer about weapons, fleets, or firepower. It was about minds, about the kind of thinking that could disrupt everything. And humans, with their boundless creativity and adaptability, might just be the wild card that would reshape the entire galaxy. In Elena's hands, the future was now a dangerous unknown. The question remained, could the galaxy survive such a shift? Could anyone, even a species as ancient and proud as the Xerar, maintain their place in a universe where humanity could bend the future to their will? Tilan did not have the answers. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be the same. Tilan sat in the quiet of his chamber, staring out into the infinite expanse of space. The stars seemed distant, cold, and indifferent, much like the vastness of the challenges that lay ahead. His mind still churned with the weight of what he had witnessed, the emergence of humanity as a force that could alter the balance of galactic power. The child, Elena, was just the beginning, but she had already redefined everything Tilan thought he knew about warfare, strategy, and potential. His species, the Xerar, had long held dominion in many corners of the galaxy. They had been dominant through their intellect, their tactical mastery, and their military might. For centuries, they had looked at others, like the humans, as small players in the cosmic game, easily contained, easily outmaneuvered. But now, everything was different. Tilan could still hear the voices in his mind, the murmurs from his fellow admirals and strategists, all grappling with the same realization. Humanity, with minds like Elena's, had the ability to rise quickly, to leap ahead in ways that no one could predict. In an instant, they could go from being an insignificant species to a galactic superpower. The only question now was how fast they would evolve, and how much of the galaxy they would claim in the process. He had seen the reports. Elena's training continued to accelerate. Her simulation victories were more sophisticated with each passing day. She wasn't merely a Starship commander. She was already on the path to something far greater, perhaps a leader capable of shifting the galaxy's course in a direction no one could foresee. The rest of the galaxy was beginning to take notice. Other species, once dismissive of human potential, now whispered in the shadows. Some saw humanity as a promising ally, others as a threat. The Xerar were no different. Tilan knew that his species could not remain passive in the face of such an unknown. There had to be a strategy, a course of action. Yet, no clear answer emerged. Could the galaxy resist the wave of change that humanity could bring? Could alliances formed over millennia stand firm against a species that operated on a different wavelength of thought? Tilan's thoughts were interrupted by the quiet hum of his communication console. He turned his gaze toward it, activating the secure transmission. The familiar face of an old colleague appeared on the screen. Commander Ilkra, one of the Xerar fleet's brightest minds. Admiral Tilan. Ilkra's voice was steady, though Tilan could detect an undertone of concern. We've been reviewing the reports. There are discussions already throughout the Council. I believe we need to address this human potential directly. Tilan leaned forward, his tone cautious. I've been thinking the same, but what can we do? This isn't something we can simply contain. We don't understand what drives them. We've never encountered a species like this. Ilkra's eyes narrowed. Exactly. Which is why we need to act. If we wait too long, they could be beyond our reach. I believe we need to make contact, offer them an alliance, yes, but also test their resolve. We must see what they are truly capable of. Tlan frowned. Are we ready to trust them? What if they take this opportunity to turn it into a strategic advantage? What if they don't need our help? Ilkra remained silent for a moment before speaking again. I think it's time we stop underestimating them. We've seen what they're capable of. And more importantly, we've seen what a single human can do. This is no longer about power. It's about understanding what humanity wants. The conversation ended, leaving Tlan in deep contemplation. He had always been a strategist, an observer of tactics and outcomes. Yet with humanity, the rules had changed. The future wasn't a clear battlefield laid out in front of him. It was an unknown horizon, filled with potential dangers and unimaginable possibilities. As Tlan gazed once more into the cold expanse of space, a thought lingered. If Alina was any indication of what humanity could become, the galaxy was about to be reshaped in ways no one could prepare for. The time for hesitation had passed. The future of the galaxy rested in the hands of those who dared to chart a new course, and humanity's path was one that Tlan could no longer ignore. The unknown had become inevitable. And in that moment, Tlan knew that whatever happened next, the universe would be forever changed by the rise of the humans.